We believe in an orchestra of compounds here. We have the analogy that likens THC to the volume dial on your stereo. You turn it up, the music gets louder, right? But it doesn't make the song better by itself. We're talking about something way more complex than that. And oversimplifying it commoditizes cannabis products, right? And it doesn't do service to the plant, which is extraordinary. It's complex. There's a lot more going on in the plant than that.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of The Dime. I'm Brian Fields. With me, as always, is Kellen Finney. And this week, we've had a very special guest, Daniel Iorga Cook, CEO of True Terpenes. Daniel, thanks for taking the time. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Excited to have you here. Kellen, how are you doing?
Doing great. Grateful to talk to Daniel today. Looking forward to jumping into a bunch of sensory stuff. How are you, Brian?
Yeah, I'm stoked. I'm really excited to kind of pick Daniel's brain on sensory science, understand how we can educate consumers so that when people come up and say, hey, I bought this because THC percentage that, maybe they shouldn't be buying that. And I'm sure Daniel's got an opinion on that, how we can kind of help transform their opinions and approaches to help people kind of better connect which products that they're buying and understand the effects and what they're needing, and kind of the nuances that go along through it. Before we get into all the fun stuff, Daniel, for our listeners, can you give a quick background on yourself and how you find your way to the cannabis space?
Yeah, you bet. So grew up in the East Coast. I was a literature major in college. No interest and no knowledge of business whatsoever. And upon graduation, applied for kind of through a Hail Mary, applied for a Fulbright scholarship and got a scholarship to actually study wine in Chile in South America. So spent the next few years stomping grapes, backpacking around South America. Ended up working for a fly fishing lodge in Patagonia for a while, and then moved to Waikiki, Hawaii, and worked with the government to create a venture capital fund out there. And I first became interested in building companies, actually working for a nonprofit back in South America called Endeavor. And essentially, Endeavor was built on the thesis that entrepreneurs exist everywhere, every nook and cranny of life. It doesn't have to be Silicon Valley, it doesn't have to be tech. They're in Brazil, Argentina, Turkey, Thailand, wherever you go. And so spent about 3 years working with these amazing entrepreneurs to build out companies, really realize their visions. And that was the spark for me, for growth entrepreneurship. It was amazing to me to see these people just will these companies into existence against all odds. And a lot of parallels to that, looking at the cannabis industry today. After that, I was really enamored by wine. And my kind of assumption was, get into something where you have a passion for the product. I moved to Argentina at this point, ended up running commercial operations for Moet Hennessy. They had a couple of wineries down there and built out those practices over about 5 years, living down in Argentina, living between the capital, Buenos Aires, and the mountains. Spent a lot of time up in the mountains in the vineyards, and enjoyed it until it became a little bit too corporate. We grew the thing during a wine boom in Argentina. It was a lot of fun until the politics and bureaucracy and all that stuff kicked in. And what I realized at that time is, the stage of company that you're at and the context is every bit as important as the product that you might have a passion for. So anyway, full circle to kind of where I am today, I ended up after Moet Hennessy, much bigger company, working at a variety of startups, as board member, as an entrepreneur myself, and really experienced everything from, the dirt roads of entrepreneurship to the paved roads of corporate life, and settled, at a time in my life where I just wanted something right in the middle. Didn't want to do 0 to 1 entrepreneurship anymore. That is tough work. And I'm only getting older, and didn't want the corporate bureaucracy anymore. Honestly, really wanted to keep building and creating in these kind of unstructured spaces. And so found my way to gravel roads. I moved to Portland, Oregon, about 8 years now, and met True Terps about 5 years ago. And what drew me to this company, they had been around for 5 years when I got here and had done an amazing job kind of lifting the company and really pioneering a new space. But what drew me to the company more than product market fit was really founder problem fit. And what I mean by that was the founder, Chris, started the company based on a personal experience he had where he had an autoimmune condition that, transformed him from being perfectly healthy to paralyzed within a matter of a few weeks. He was on a cocktail of pharmaceuticals that really robbed him of quality of life. And he discovered the work of Dr. Ethan Russo, cannabis and terpenes, And that really put him on his path, over a decade ago. And so what I realized, when I joined the company and committed to Chris that we would build this together and bring it to the next stage, what I, realized was like, this guy would run through walls to make this happen. Like this really, matters to him on a deep personal level. This is something important. He didn't pick this startup idea out of a hat. It was based on that personal experience that he really believed that this has to exist in the world. And so that origin story really has informed a lot of who True Terps is today. And, I think really informed a lot of the decisions we've made kind of along our path.
I would imagine early on when you were considering taking the role of True Terpenes, you had this perception of what the role would be like, what the industry would be like. How different was those early days? And was there one thing when you got started that just surprised you more than anything that you couldn't even account for, just kind of thinking back through it?
Yeah, so I ended up living about 10 years in South America, and I got used to a certain level of volatility, risk tolerance, and just needing to stay agile and kind of roll with the punches. So I had some good training, I think, for the cannabis world. Down in South America, it's a little bit different, sort of volatility, but yeah, you're prone to regulatory changes at the drop of a dime. You can have inflation that goes 500% from one month to the next. So a loaf of bread costs $1, then it costs $500. It's a hard environment to plan for, right? We were with Moet Hennessy, there was a time when inflation, in the country level was rising. We had the government come to us and say we couldn't raise prices because that would only lead to inflation because we're a very visible company. So there's a lot of that lack of control, a lot of that volatility that prepared me. But it's just another level with cannabis, and it's very hard to plan for. It's very hard to prepare for. You can't have single points of failure. You have to have a diversified base in whatever you do because you can't predict outcomes kind of across every, risk point that you have there. So going into any company that's been around for 5 years is a challenge because there's a lot of history already. There's a lot of things that have happened. One of the things that we did that was very helpful early days was really do this kind of, it was almost like an archaeological dig of the culture of True Terps. What were the decisions that made the company who it was up to that point, and aspirationally, who do we want to be going forward? We codified that and really made that a central part of our culture. And, through the volatility, through the madness, it's really helped us navigate through all of that with a certain sense of solidity. To give you a sense of timing, I joined True Terps and COVID hit a month later. So we had explosive growth with True Terps through its first few years. It kind of leveled off a little bit before I got there. My commitment was to help Chris reset and prepare for that next stage of growth. I didn't know how much of a reset it would be, and doing that, throughout COVID certainly was a challenge.
Yeah, I can only imagine a massive challenge. But I want to go back to what you said was like understanding like the true central message and then kind of running the strategy through that. That's probably really, really helpful too, because you see all the chaos that happens in this industry. People are making quick, short-term decisions, but if your North Star continues to be the same, all the strategy then just works underneath it because does this align with our North Star? Yes, we continue. If not, we don't consider it right now.
100%. And it's hard, same thing in South America. There's often a mentality to plan for the short term because the longer term is not guaranteed. If bread's going to go up $500 in a day, like it's hard to make decisions, from here to a month from now. But it's equally as important to have a vision for, a project for the country, or in this case, a project for the industry. That's a common project that builds a sustainable foundation. This is too valuable to go away and to lose the chance that we have, despite how challenging it is, obviously, and how much work has been put in, in years past. So yeah, it is tough, but it's really helped us navigate through those tough times. Sometimes you make decisions for the longer run. I tend to think, having been in startups and growth companies for almost 30 years now, I tend to think that, when you rush things too much, you're making poor decisions. You build on an unstable foundation. When you slow down a little bit sometimes and build for the longer term, it pays off. And people are in the game for different reasons. We're not here to try to flip something to kind of calculate the timing of the market and get it when the market's high and sell out. That's not our game. We're trying to build something enduring here that's around for a long time. And so in some ways, it simplifies things because you don't have to get cute with the market or the timing or when the regs come or not. You just accept the risk that we have today and you make the best decisions you can and you move forward.
Can you give us just a size of True Terpenes, how big it is, and then just some of the depths of the different client size? Because I think when we were talking through some of the numbers, it was really impressive on how big True Terpenes was.
Yeah, and True Terps, I mean, the way I would define what we do, we're essentially a flavor innovation house. So we shape the experience in some of the most exciting cannabis products in the world. Our innovations, our formulas go into about $8 billion worth of consumer level products each year. And growing, right? So the reach is great. We have about 5,000 clients in about 70 countries. I mean, lion's share is obviously the United States and a little bit on the Canadian side as well. International is becoming very interesting to us, though, for the future. It's not something we focused on, but high growth for us for sure. And our clients are, everybody you can imagine, from the smallest kind of local, cannabis brands and producers to, mid-regional level to the largest. So it's every brand that and can imagine it is. And the way we engage with our clients is essentially, it's not really about specialty ingredients. Cannabis is a jungle. And we're here to help our clients survive the jungle. And so we help them plan out their product portfolios. We help them identify opportunities, de-risk the market in ways that we can. And it's, it goes beyond product innovation and formulation. We'll talk about sensory, which, favorite topic. We're built on sensory, on a foundation of sensory science at the intersection of market relevance. However, we support with a lot more than that, right? So some of the support we do is on applications. So not just the formula in a bottle, but how does it apply to a pre-roll, a vape, a gummy, a beverage? And what's the best way to get that into the hands of their market and give the consumer the best experience possible, right? To help them compete in a very competitive market. It's toxicology. We've had a toxicology program, for the past 5 years where we're defining the playing field of ingredients that we'll use based on peer-reviewed research on what is considered safe for inhalation. ASTM, which is a nonprofit organization that develops and researches and promotes standards globally for different industries. They've had a cannabis committee for the past few years, and they just adopted our standards for toxicology, to promote globally. And what that does is it creates a model by which you can evaluate different compounds and ingredients in formulation. And then it gives you the application of that model to actually look at specific ingredients and define thresholds by which they're considered safe, making certain assumptions based on the model. And so to our knowledge, it was the first of its kind in the industry. That data we actually license to clients so they have access to our safety data. And when we formulate by that playbook. We're not going to use stuff above a threshold or certain ingredients that are unsafe in our products. And so that's a great example when it comes to kind of building for the long term, but taking a shorter term hit. It was painful to go through the process of really adapting to that model and not using the full universe of compounds and ingredients that are out there, because there are shortcuts, right? They're not safe. We won't use them. We'll focus on what we believe is safe and serves our clients in the community.
That allows your clients to sleep easy at night, essentially, though, right? Because they now know that the formulation that they're providing has all of these certifications. So how much has that helped in just speeding up the formulation process from an R&D perspective in terms of dialogue back and forth with your clients?
It builds longer term trust, Kellen, with the clients, and that's essential for us. As I said, when they have either an opportunity or a problem with the product portfolio, we want to be the first call that they make. We want to have a seat on that product roadmap, product planning, committee with them. And we want to be their best resource on whether it's tox, whether it's applications development, whether it's sensory and flavor, whether it's leveraging our data. Again, we have $8 billion worth of data each year. It's not at the strain level or the brand level, but it's at the sensory level, which I think is critical. And so, I think the engagement with the clients is key. Building that trust over time is key. Honestly, the formulation, we have to be a little bit more imaginative to get to the end states of formulation we want to, because again, it is a limitation not being able to use the full universe of compounds. So we're able to do, I think, in a pretty agile way, but looking at this holistically.
So just high level standpoint, someone's listening to this, they're thinking about a formulation, they've got this really creative idea that kind of mixes in things, and they're like, hey, True Terpenes, Does it start with an idea or does it start somewhere different? Like, how does that first conversation get kicked off? And then how do you go through, check the box, this is impossible? How does that process work?
It varies, right? And there's two ways it can happen. It can be the inspiration, of a client, something they see in the marketplace. There's so many, again, the range and types of clients that we serve is so broad. Now, equally, they have to deal with a tough market environment and a tough industry. But in terms of their thesis, their reason for being, who they're targeting, it varies greatly, as you can imagine. So it can come from the inspiration of the principles of our client, the founder, the CEO, the product team, the innovation team, where they can come to us and say, hey, we have this idea. Have you guys ever worked on something like that, right? Or can you guys formulate something that looks like this? We think there's an opportunity there. We'll put a brief together. We'll work collaboratively with our, we have 14 trained sensory experts on our team that will work with the client on, realizing that idea. It'll go through different rounds of testing, and then we'll put it into the application and actually try it at the application level. So starts at the formulation level, goes to the application level. We'll try to realize their vision. The other way it could happen is, again, part of what we do is how do we tie in some of our, market data with sensory descriptors and identify emerging opportunities. And so we can also look, it can come proactively from our side where we can look at the client's product portfolio and say, okay, we grid that out, you're hitting all these categories here. We saw market movement in this sort of a strain profile or this sort of a flavor or this sort of an application. You have a gap in your portfolio there, right? That is, automatic growth right there. So we're the tip of the spear for innovation in that sense, where we can point them to where the opportunity is, back it with data, and then build that project out for them.
That's exactly what I was thinking through the process, right? You've got like a brand, let's just say on the West Coast that wants to come east, and you're seeing, hey, we know you want to go left, but right here, we're seeing this gap in the market is exploding with these type of demographics and consumers, and we think we might be considered. And that's where the data, the science, and all that information is so valuable from a partnership standpoint, because this team could make this massive investment, and sure, you could go forward and do what they want, and ultimately they're the client. But having that data to back it up and demonstrate that here's this trajectory that you can uncover if you consider this is an elite partnership that is really hard to understate.
100%. I mean, even if you think about the largest MSO, or corporate company out there, the data we see is a multiple of that, 3-4 times X, the biggest one in terms of revenue. And so for any company, regardless of size, we try to have a conversation, we try to collaborate, show them what we're seeing from our perspective in the marketplace, 5,000 clients, $8 billion. It's valuable data. And it's again, the way it's characterized is by true sensory, not by some other kind of markers that might be a little bit deceptive if you just look at the market research, right? Because you don't know what the building blocks of the actual product are. And we will look at our data. What you're looking at is the building blocks. So you get the true essence of what the products are.
You talk about like maybe they're missing a specific category. Can you like talk us through those categories that you guys have as like your base sensory categories? And are these like similar to like wine essentially or something like that, where you'd be like it's earthy or fruity? Can you kind of like how you guys like break up those categories to do the initial like matrix analysis?
Yeah, for sure. And maybe I could give you a kind of a sense of our canvas of ingredients that we paint with, right?
Yeah.
And then we'll definitely get into some of the sensory. I think that's interesting, and some of the parallels with wine I think are very interesting as well. In terms of ingredient set, so we go we talked about applications, but also in terms of ingredients, we go the spectrum. For the past 4 years, we've contract grown, contract extracted, type 3 hemp. So you're talking about the popular strains and cultivars, right? Without the THC burden, right? And that there's a big level of attraction for that because it's indistinguishable from cannabis, right? What we're growing. We have a genetics program that's gone for 10 years, working with and stabilizing the genetics in some of those popular sensory targets that we're looking at. And so we go from fresh frozen BHO extract hemp, right? Type 3 hemp, to botanical terpenes, right? From, it's all moving towards natural. Like synthetic there's no demand for that in the market, right? So it's all natural from different plants. A lot of the work with Dr. Ethan Russo has rotated around how do we leverage that as well, right? And then there's things that you can do in the middle, and there's a convergence. I think people are loosening up a little bit on how they tap into different ingredients and create different products for different markets. For us, we try not to be, opinionated in terms of, oh, well, don't use that or don't use that. It's yes and usually, can you create something that resonates and creates a real differentiator in the marketplace? And then within that, you see a lot of things happening that converge those worlds a little bit. On the hemp side, berry has been a huge resurgence. Like berry with gas has been a huge resurgence. Some of our own genetics are really targeting that. But also on the side where you're using some top notes, maybe from some botanical terpenes, having a cannabis backbone in that, right, to increase the depth and the complexity and the character of it is also interesting. And so we try to be, agnostic, create innovative products, and they're for all market types and segments, right? We want to grow the industry, not limit it. And then in terms of the categories, Cal, to your point on, sensory targets or sensory buckets, I mean, that is one of the things that is really missing, from the cannabis world. If you go and look at, what happened within the wine world, in the early 80s, there was a sensory chemist from UC Davis. Her name was Ann Noble, and she created kind of the first sensory aroma-wheel for wine, right? What happened after that is super interesting. It became adopted worldwide by the wine industry as the standard, right? And it's so important because they were able to then tie, general aromatic and flavor, targets, right? It could be, for example, tropical fruit, right? Then into something, targets that are more specific, mango, right? And then really break out the wine world and then connect it to the varietals in a way that, here's the key, was standardized by the industry. And so now you have somms, retailers, wine critics, consumers talking the same language. And that's the key for them to really make sense of that world. That today is really what is missing in the cannabis world. There's no standardization of the sensory, linguistics and nomenclature around this. And that's what's needed to help consumers navigate that world. Because as we believe, sensory really does, drive enjoyment. It drives pleasure. The hedonics about this is really where it's at. That's what's needed.
So how do we get there, right? Like, because people walk into dispensaries now, and I think everyone's favorite is indica and sativa or THC percentage. That seems to be, just from a common standpoint, what most people purchase by. But hearing what you're saying, there needs to be some standardization so consumers can get better aligned products. But to get there requires a massive shift in education of consumers, education of budtenders, and alignment of information. So what is the first step in order to get us on that roadmap?
Yeah, I think we're taking the first steps. I think the first step to take is a realization that currently in the environment we're in, there's a lot of noise that really, makes it hard to discern product attributes, makes it hard to discern what experience people are really going to have. And I think you mentioned, Brian, THC, and THC is important. Of course it's important. It's incredibly important, but that's a single compound. And we believe in an orchestra of compounds here. We have the analogy that likens THC to the volume dial on your stereo. You turn it up, the music gets louder, right? But it doesn't make the song better by itself. We're talking about something way more complex than that. And oversimplifying it commoditizes cannabis products, right? And it doesn't do service to the plant, which is extraordinary. It's complex. There's a lot more going on in the plant than that. And so for us, it's that, that symphony, it's that, you have the rhythm, the composition, the melody. That's what cannabis is. And when you kind of compare it to wine, a Bordeaux, you'll have 800 compounds in a Bordeaux, right? A first growth Bordeaux, some of the finest wines in the world. And you would never take that Bordeaux and say, oh, this one has 15% ABV. So it must be better than this Bordeaux that has 13% ABV. That would just be silly, right? And you're ignoring those 800 compounds. Well, cannabis has upwards towards 1,000 compounds, right? That all influence that experience and inform that experience. And so the kind of arms race of THC is a fallacy. It doesn't diminish the importance of THC. It's like the drummer, right? It's the engine, right? But a lot of these other aromatic compounds are, the steering wheel. And it's not just terpenes, mind you. It's esters and aldehydes and terpenoids, all these things coming together in concert. I worked as an entrepreneur in residence for a company called Califia Farms. They do almond milks and juices out of the Central Valley, California. And we looked deeply into, an area that I kind of liken a little bit to the THC arms race, and that was with protein. And with protein, you just get this very superficial treatment because it's a marketing shortcut to say, hey, the more protein this product has, the better it is. Well, that ignores everything else that's going on. What about your amino acid balance? Is it coming from plants or whole grains? Is it, a 20 gram synthetic protein isolate isn't necessarily better than a 10 gram amino acid balance, plant and seed protein base, right? Because your body will absorb that better. And so these are shortcuts. There's ways to kind of oversimplify things, but it does do a disservice to the consumer. I think when you get to get back to your question, when you get to what do we do from here? I mean, some of it's being done, some of it's being done. There are studies that are out there. If you've heard of the Cultivation Classic, it was run here in Oregon several years ago by one of our core team and a group of colleagues. And essentially what they did is they took 300, is one of the largest studies like this ever done. They took 300 consumers. It was double-blinded, right? They took some of the top, dozens of the top craft growers, cannabis growers in Oregon at the time, and they did cycles, so more than one event, cycles of testing different flower products for hedonics, for enjoyment, right? And the ones with THC did not perform better than the ones with some of the aromatic markers that were expected and terpene profiles that were expected. THC did not shape the experience and the enjoyment. It was sensory that shaped the experience and the enjoyment, right? There's another study done by, recently put out by PAX and a group called Mellow, that it's an EEG study that looked at two strains, one with double the THC, and then the other one with a very robust, aromatic terpene profile. And the one with the more intense aromatic profile really produced over 2 times the brain activity and psychoactive activity that the other one did. And so the first step is starting to really put these data sets together and show that yes, THC is important, but there's so much more going on. And let's recognize that first. And we could talk about indica, sativa, and different things like that. But I think that's the first recognition, is really get the data together. For us, the move that wine made over 30 years ago, right? And we're not, wine's been around for a very long time as well. And it's been, there's some outlaw winemakers, but it's been above ground for a lot longer than cannabis has. So it's got a head start. But that early work they did in the 80s was super important to come up with that common language. So from our perspective, you really need to not only kind of acknowledge what's contributing to enjoyment in the plant and back it with science and back it with data. Then I think there has to be some sort of concerted effort to align on what is the language, right, by which we'll define some of those sensory markers that are driving enjoyment, right, and really aligning around that. And that's a long-term effort. It's going to take a collaborative effort, but really important to work at. For our part at True Terpenes, we contributed to several studies. One of the more recent ones that we've done, we contributed the flower to from one of our grows. And this was a study done by Oregon State University much more recently. And essentially what they did is they trained 45 panelists, and they had them test both cannabis and hemp across a broad range of kind of sensory profiles. It's the first study in what will be many. But what they started to do is segment them into these aroma archetypes, right? Where we could start kind of organizing what a hierarchy might look like. OSU is a leader in this field, not just for cannabis, which is actually quite new, for wine, for beer, for other categories. They do this sort of work. It's a multi-year, long-term commitment to continue the work and continue the categorization and get the credibility behind it and the momentum behind it. But it's important work, we feel. One of the things we're most excited about internally is really leveraging our $8 billion worth of data, right? Matching some of what we see on the commercial data with some of this language on hedonics and on sensory, right? So then you start to see what tracks and actually what people are resonating with. And it's not just the strain names, right? It's not just the THC levels. It's not just the brand names, but it's actually the sensory building blocks behind that. which is really, what we believe drives enjoyment.
I have a question regarding strain variability, right? Because like in the wine industry, like a cab is a cab, right? Like, yes, there's slight differences, but like if I buy a cab, even if it's a low grade cab, I can tell the difference between that and like a Merlot, right? And so there is like standardization within the cultivar as well, right? And so
Sure.
like, do you guys get any pushback from like, hey, this is our OG, and maybe you're doing some R&D with a client, you send it to them and they're like, well, my OG smells differently. Like, is that a normal conversation? And if so, how do you guys like handle those subtle differences?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I think, cannabis is unique in that, due to amazing work by cannabis breeders over decades and decades at great risk, it's become the most outbred plant probably in history, which has created this amazing diversity of aromas and profiles and chemotypes, which is a huge benefit and asset to this world of cannabis. And so I think first recognizing that, I think it's critical. And I think the story is a little bit more nuanced than that as well, with cultivars and with strains. In that, there is, of course, the genetics. And there's also that these are plants grown in a moment in time, right? And these are plants grown in a certain location and place. I think in agriculture, and especially like this sort of value-added agriculture, whether it's wine or whether it's cannabis or something else, we have to realize the complexity of that as well, right? And it does introduce nuance. It does introduce some variability. But I think that's a feature, not a bug. I think that's a great thing. It makes it more interesting. This is not Coca-Cola, right? So I think it makes it compelling. I think, you get back to really, this is about storytelling, right? For me, a differentiated industry is driven off of this sort of magical stories about place in a moment in time and genetics and the great, breeding heritage behind a certain strain. It's the convergence of all that. Like that's magical storytelling. For me, like a race to the bottom is like more THC percentage. That's a commodity. We will all lose that game, right? It will be driven into commodity territory. Like, tell me a story about THC percentage that's like the compelling and magical, right? It's not. It's just not. And so I think, the genetic diversity is a huge asset to the industry. It's a great legacy that we have and owe tribute to, but let's tell the whole story.
Playing the other side, though, just leads into even harder for someone like yourself, right? Because like at Kellen's example, a cab from California probably doesn't taste like a cab from New York, but people from New York, when they try that, they're like, I don't really like this OG that I had, but it's not the same. And that's where it becomes like different from an educational standpoint, all these demographics, which just leads to more and more challenges because it seems like consumers are walking dispensaries for the first time now. They're understanding a little bit about this and they're reaching for whatever they can figure out, indica or sativa. And then they're like, okay, what's the next marker to make a selection? It's THC percentage. But you're right, there should be a better way to understand. Maybe it's like a sliding graph. Can we get to the effect side? Do you think it'll be more of like calm versus energetic, or do you think it'll be more terpene based where there's specifics and nuances of the nomenclature that consumers need to know the differences of?
Yeah, look, and we worked with Dr. Russo on a line of terpene profiles that it is, it's calm, it's, energy, it's, focus. And I think that's valid. We based it on his 30 years of research with terpenes and cannabis, came up with these, profiles and, and they do well. I think there's going to be a segment of the market for that, certainly. But I think the opportunity around sensory driven, both for effects as well as just enjoyment and pleasure, right, is a vast universe. I think there's so much more opportunity in that, to just kind of, it's a little reductionist just to go to, all right, well, there's 5 effects and we're going to just ram everything through those 5 effects. Yes, there's going to be effects-based products. And yes, they're going to be impactful and great to have. And there'll be a niche for that. I just think, especially as this opens up to a broader world, not just here in the US, but abroad, I think it's really exciting to think about the universe and the chemoscape that you can have with all this variety and diversity, right? And discovery process, right? I mean, look, wine is incredibly complex as well. And when you look at how it was grown in Europe, I mean, it's funny. Americans will often take shortcuts with marketing genius to like get something simpler and, easier to kind of understand at the consumer level. Like we took all, the appellations in Europe, right? Everything's based on a region, right? So Gigondas or Bordeaux or Burgundy, they didn't market through varietals, right? They marketed through the regions. And then in certain regions, you're allowed to grow certain grapes, right? And so there's layers of complexity of learning. And in the US, right, in the 70s, 80s, we're like, way too complicated. Merlot, Cab, and we reduced it down. And now it's kind of not either or, it's yes and, which is kind of part of my point too, is not, I don't want to make judgment on certain things that are working and kind of getting through. It's yes and how do we grow the pie? How do we make this bigger, more applicable to more people? And I think, you'll have different levels of people who want to embrace the learning, embrace the exploration, become the expert. It makes it interesting, right? It doesn't have to be all one level of understanding, all one level of product. It really can be, expansive.
Do you think that cannabis will go that direction in the future, right? Where it will be like region based in terms of like, oh, I like OGs from Southern Oregon because they have a more earthy kind of note to it. Do you kind of foresee that like consumer entering the market as they mature in the market, if you will?
I can absolutely see that, as a part of the landscape. I mean, I'd be careful to, especially having come from wine, I'd be careful to say that it's going to follow the path of wine because it's so different in so many ways. And I think it has a different dimension to it, especially on the therapeutic level, that you may not have in wine. I think there are similarities. I think in terms of what influences the profile, genetics, moment in time and place. I do think that influences the profile of cannabis. So I think there'll be opportunities to do that for sure. Now, will everyone have to do that? Probably not. In wine, they don't either, in wine, it's more expansive. So I think the main thing is, just opening up. And as we kind of continue to mature, again, it's yes and not like this, not this sort of thing.
What is the landscape behind claims like internationally, right? Like if you can say like, hey, we know that these 5 terpenes are linked to this study that resulted in a calming effect. Like, where's that line between like therapeutics and like nutraceuticals? And like, is that something that you guys are actively exploring?
Yeah, we are. We're working on some projects right now with groups that perform clinical trials that do more hardcore medical research on this. We're very interested in that. Dr. Russo is on our science board, and we are, I have a long-standing relationship, with him over the past 5 years. It came full circle for, Chris, the founder, when he, had his health issues. It was Russo's work who inspired him over a decade ago. And so it's a privilege to be in this position to be able to do some of that work. That is longer term work that, as you guys well know, if done properly, it does take time. And, we've collaboratively worked with UCLA, Johns Hopkins on terpene studies. So we very much support that. In addition to the sensory studies that we do, we've done, functional health benefit terpene studies. There's a lot of work to do, a lot more work to do on that side. We try to right now, in terms of like hardcore functional health claims, we avoid it. We can recommend what, Dr. Russo has formulated based on his research, based on what he's seen. There are certain compounds that have more evidence behind them than others. Today, like linalool, for example, for relaxation is one, pinene for focus and clarity is another. So there are certain, myrcene, right, for sedation. So there are certain compounds, there are certain terpenes that we can certainly point to and directionally give guidance to. Each market is so complex too. We're just right now really looking at the European market as things kind of advance on the regulatory medical front quite a bit. And it's, there's the EU, but then there's each country, right? One thing on the medical side is like, there is an open, transparent, predictable, regulation of this. So like, that's one advantage they definitely have out there. But on the medical side, it goes through pharmacists, it gets prescribed, you actually get reimbursed for cannabis in many markets, right? And so the bar is very high. I think in Germany, the first vape pen actually just got approved recently. So things are moving over there. But I think you have to be careful with medical claims. And, what we don't want to do is lose credibility for the industry. and get ahead of ourselves saying things that we can't really substantiate because it's hard to get the credibility back once you lose it.
Yeah, it's nearly impossible, right? You built a really scientific trust behind the name and a brand, and people defer to that because of the brand that you've trusted. And at the moment that gets lost, all credibility is gone. But kind of standardizing that has to be, is it more complicated going across country lines? Obviously, state lines, United States has its own complications, but is it more complicated, same complicated going across the water?
There's nuances. So on the more complicated side, one of the things that you do have is if it's a medical company, right, it has to be, the product has to be GMP. Now, because we're not producing the final product, it's not that True Terpenes we are GMP certified in the US, but it's different in Europe. And so it's not that we have to be European GMP. However, what has to happen is the client, the medical company, has to come to us and say, hey, look, we have this audit that we're going to have to run of True Terpenes, and for us to be able to use your input, you have to pass the audit, right? And so we were the first terpene company, about 18 months ago that started passing these audits because our house is in order. And we were able to very quickly get some of these brands to market because they could get through those audits pretty quickly. And so, that's one, getting back to making the tough decisions early about, toxicology, about how we're organized, about how we're built. It has paid off in Europe because it's helped us accelerate that cycle quite a bit because we were built for that from the beginning. Our view to whatever regulatory changes in the US happen, we're also going to be built for that, and so we're going to be ready when it comes. So that, that is certainly takes longer because there's that audit process. On the other side, everything is, the market here in the US is so much more mature in terms of, the preferred experiences, the strains and cultivars, the applications. We're light years ahead just out of experience and maturation because it's been here. And so I think there's a lot that can be learned. There's a lot of lessons that we can apply over there of what we've seen work here and account for the nuances of that market as well. But it definitely, you can leapfrog some aspects of it as well.
What about exploring outside cannabis industries? Is that something that True Terpenes is doing, considering? What can you share about that?
Yeah, we've had a project that has been in R&D for a few years where we found a novel way to take it's essentially a waste stream from hop extracts, hop from beer, right? And convert it into this fragrant hop oil and then punch it up with some botanical terpenes for top note flavor. And we've come up with this product that for brewers, and this is at a time where the beer industry is, compressed. It's really suffering. We found out a way for them to add, innovation toolkit to their arsenal and actually save money. And so it's, more innovation and better economics, essentially. Launched that about a year ago. And it's really picked up steam with a lot of the craft brewers, around the country, groups like Freedom here in Oregon or Varietal up in Washington, as well as some of the larger crafts as well. And so we've been, it's basically taken a competency that we've already had and applied it, to a new space. So we really haven't had to allocate much in the way of resources towards it or anything like that. It was really an experiment, a flyer, but, very interesting. On the other side, I think in the ingredient and flavor world, there's a lot of interest in, some of the things that we're exploring in terms of sensory. And I'll give you an example. There are compounds found in cannabis and hemp that are found at parts per billion, parts per trillion even in some of them. Some of those in their natural form are incredibly valuable and incredibly valuable as ingredients outside of cannabis, right? For the aromatics and for the flavor. And some of those volatiles, very hard to extract, very hard to maintain and stabilize. But there's a lot of interest, in that, and we've certainly, have had some conversations about, how you might harness those.
Can you give us any other ideas, experiments? I think like getting an inside look to see like how to push a team continually for innovation and challenge them to continue to think outside the box. Is there any other experiments, anything maybe that internally you thought was a great idea that just never ended up materializing? Or on the other side, things that you were like continue to be excited about that you keep pushing the team?
Yeah, on infusions, that's one of our, important projects today. It's a category we see, that will continue to grow. One application of that would be pre-rolls. And, what you often will find is there is an intense aroma, but something lost on flavor when you smoke. And so we're developing some proprietary technology around that I can't share too much more than that right now, but we think it'll be huge, and it's coming to market soon. So infusions, huge.
Just the three of us if you're interested in sharing.
my team would fire me. So that's a good one. One that we're still... we've done a lot of research. We've done a lot of investigation in it. I've done beverage for years. I was always excited about cannabis beverage, and when it kind of hit with hemp, it's like, this is like, it's the right, distribution point. It's the right consumer experience. I'm excited about the future of that. I think there's a lot to do. We've been doing a lot of benchmarking research on emulsions and emulsion stability, especially in cans. And so there's some great work today being done on that. I think there's a lot more to do. And then I think there's a lot of work on sensory for beverage that could be very exciting. So for beverage, we kind of have a patient approach. We sell flavors into beverage, but just flavors, nothing, on the emulsion side or anything like that. And I would envision in the future, we do some pretty exciting, beverage projects, really linking that up with some of our work, with genetics, in the farm, with extraction to come up with something really, unique, that could parallel, something beyond a seltzer water, right? That could parallel, the craft cocktails or other sorts of drinks like that. But again, that's a multi-year project. It's a pretty complex project. One we hope to see though.
That sounds awesome. Hard pivot. What is the most expensive lesson you've ever learned?
Well, how much time do you have? There's a few. Look, here at True Terps, we went through a period where we grew so fast. We really expanded our team. We hired about 50 people in 6 months. And the truth is, we just didn't have, and we built out our current headquarters, right, which is in Oregon, just outside of Portland. And, it's full scale labs, production facilities, going from, 50 people to over 100 people very rapidly. And the truth is, we did not have the process architecture down to absorb those people, in the right way and really create the operating cadence and expectations about what we needed. And so it was so much complexity all at once. And the truth is, we weren't ready. It was traumatic. We navigated through that by, the move began in fall of 2022. By Q2 of 2023, we kind of navigated through that and really stabilized. But it was definitely some growing pains throughout that. And with that roadmap now, I probably would have approached that differently. And organize that differently. And I think throughout changes like that, one of the top lessons is like just over communicate things until you're sick of hearing yourself say it, but you can't say it enough to really align people around the principles that you need and really have that operating cadence, that process, architecture down. So that people are marching in the same direction and have that alignment in metrics and KPIs that go from the company to department to individual level, and it kind of cascades down, and you have that synchronicity. Because when you make that leap in growth, you go from more of a generalist sort of organization to all of a sudden you got a lot of specialists, and you got departments, and silos build up, and communication across silos and departments becomes harder. And it takes a lot of lateral vision to kind of work through that, a lot of over communication to work through that. But you also need the process architecture.
That's great advice. Most impactful book you've ever read?
Most impactful book. There's so many. I was a literature major, right? Hey man, it's hard to beat. For me, it's hard to beat Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea. Old Santiago really gets my heart. I'm a big fan of Hemingway, Carver, Didion. These were writers who tell stories with concision, right? They gave, and this kind of goes to the way I think about sensory in the cannabis world. They gave the reader ways to not have to beat them over the head with the story. They were very efficient, concise with their words, And it's like Hemingway's iceberg theory, right? You see the tip of the iceberg, but there's so much more there that the reader fills in, right? And it's just so compact and so efficient and such great stories that have not only that concision, but they have like that drum beat, like that rhythm to the literature that kind of keeps moving. So stories like that I love. And yeah, the characters out of Hemingway's writings I also love.
I love it. Last question. What question do you wish more people asked you?
I wish more people asked about our toxicology program and why we did that, and kind of what was the driver for it, and how would it impact their products?
Is there a single answer you can give if somebody asks that question?
Because we built this thing to last, and we'd love for you guys to be around for a long time too.
I think that's the perfect way to end it. So Daniel, for our listeners, they want to get in touch, they want to learn more, where can they find you?
TrueTerps.com, Instagram, LinkedIn are the best ways. But yeah, thanks guys. I appreciate the time today.
Thanks for taking the time. This was a lot of fun.
All right, guys. Cheers.